Have you ever wondered why, if coronavirus is so prevalent, right? Every day that you turn on the TV, you're hearing more and more about coronavirus. Every morning that you wake up, you see more deaths, more illness, etc. You're saying, well, I'm seeing all this coronavirus, but have you ever wondered why people are then saying, don't worry about coronavirus and instead get your flu shot, or get your flu shot, or what you should be worrying about is the flu and not coronavirus? You know, if you're like me or anyone else out there, you might have actually wondered about that. And I'm actually a physician. So I wanted to break this down today, this concept of coronavirus and flu, and where our hearts and minds need to be right now. I'm Dr. Jen Caudle. Thanks so much for joining me. Make sure that you like my page if you're checking out this video. I'm pretty much doing updates on coronavirus almost every day because I'm pretty much on the news many days talking about this, and this is such an evolving topic. But one thing that has been really difficult for me, I'll be honest with you as a physician who talks about this on the news, is this concept of you shouldn't be worried about the coronavirus. What you should be worried about is the flu. My feeling, honestly, is we should be worried about both. Now, look, there are also sentiments about that I do agree with. I'm going to break it down for you, okay? So let's talk about the stuff the part that I don't agree with, which is this idea that somehow the flu is more important than coronavirus. The flu is not more important than coronavirus. It's different than the coronavirus. They are both very important. And in fact, I think sometimes the messaging that, oh, you shouldn't worry about coronavirus, what you need to be worried about is the flu, sometimes I think that almost minimizes what people who have coronavirus or who are living in countries with coronavirus are going through. And I, as a person, I'm just personally not comfortable with that. Let's talk about coronavirus, okay? We know that every time you turn on your TV, you're seeing news about this virus that's really infecting and affecting many nations throughout the world. If you live in the United States like I do, we are pretty lucky. We are pretty blessed in that we don't have widespread cases of coronavirus here. We do not have coronavirus spreading in the community. And so our situation is different. But I don't like the idea of potentially minimizing what other cultures and countries are going through. Guys, coronavirus is affecting thousands and millions potentially. There are countries, as we know, that are on lockdown. And as a person, I'm not even talking about as a doctor, as a person and someone who cares about humanity, which I know you all do too, I think it's important to understand what the world is going through. So I'm not willing to say, don't worry about coronavirus. I do think we need to worry about coronavirus. I do. What I want to say to you is if you feel that way too, it's okay. Because as a doctor, what I don't want to do is tell you, oh, you don't need to worry about coronavirus. What you should worry about is the flu. What we need to be thinking about is both. However, how we act is going to be different for both. Now, let's go to the other side, okay? Let's talk about why we're saying don't worry so much about coronavirus. What you need to be worried about is the flu. Let's talk about that. Just as we don't want to minimize what people are going through throughout the world, we also don't want to minimize the other risks that we have at our doorstep. So you say, well, why do they keep saying, go get my flu shot? Like, don't worry about coronavirus when all I see is coronavirus on the news. Well, let me tell you, first of all, and I got a list here. When we talk about worrying and when we talk about things like coronavirus, you know, it's everywhere, right? It's on the news, it's on the radio, it's on social media, and in many ways, rightfully so. But it can easily invoke panic. The problem when we get panic is we get erratic behavior that is not necessarily helpful. When people begin to panic, when societies begin to panic, what do? We start running out and buying every mask on Amazon, and we don't leave masks for those who really need them. When we panic and when there's widespread fear, what do? We start criticizing, critiquing, and discriminating against other people inappropriately, the xenophobia that we're seeing. I've seen so many and heard so many jokes about those who are of Asian descent and coronavirus. Just because you're Asian doesn't mean you're at any higher risk for coronavirus if you're in this country. And that's the type of stuff. This is what we see when there's panic. Panic is not helpful, and panic is not appropriate, and panic is often harmful, okay? We don't need to panic. We need to be thoughtful. We need to be measured. So that's the first reason that I actually do agree with this idea of, you know, hey, let's measure ourselves. The second thing is perspective, okay? Risk depends on exposure, guys. If we lived in China, if we lived in another country, I would be saying different things. But we don't. We live in the United States, and thus our risk is low. That's really, really, really important. We don't have the same level of risk as other people in other places. And that's one of the reasons why, even though every day you turn on your TV and you see coronavirus, you need to take a step back and say, okay, this is what's happening throughout the world. This is how it's affecting the world, affecting people. Now, what's it doing where I am? Oh, the risk is low. Okay. It means you take a step back and you recognize that. Okay. Now, the other thing that I would also say is, okay, you say, well, why the flu? Then why y'all bring up the flu? Why y'all keep saying get the flu shot? What does the flu have to do with coronavirus? Well, the flu doesn't have anything to do with coronavirus, really. They're both viruses. That's it. I think what we're trying to do, is to say, we know you're worried. Look, I'm worried too. I'm worried for all the people in the world that are dealing with coronavirus. We're dealing with it too. This is worrisome. However, right now, for us in the United States, in many ways, our risks of getting the flu are higher than our risks of getting coronavirus. Now, that's not necessarily the case in other parts of the world, but right here, that is. And I want to remind you that just like coronavirus can be deadly, so can the flu. In fact, the CDC reported today's Monday, February 24th, that there have been 105 pediatric deaths from the flu. Guys, that's scary. That's really, really scary. Think about if we'd had 105 deaths from coronavirus. How would you feel about that in this country? You'd be terrified, wouldn't you? And the idea is, let's not lower our threshold for concern with the flu. We have 105 kids that have died this season from complications of the flu. That's greater than most seasons in the last, I think, since like 2004 or something like that. And what I don't want is all these fears about coronavirus to make us ignore what's at our doorstep. Someone across the street could die from the flu, but they're not likely to die from coronavirus because we don't have that. So the attempts and the reminders about getting the flu shot is to say, hey, luckily, we live in a country where coronavirus is not spreading widespread through the community. Yes, it is a risk globally. Yes, we are seeing cases and it is fearful, but our risk in this country is low for that. But we do have a risk for the flu, and we do have people that die from it. So let's do what we can to fight the flu, which is something we can do. And I have to say, guys, this is another thing I have to say. Some of y'all are asking for vaccines against coronavirus when you won't even get the flu shot. Think about that. Okay? Think about that. This conversation that I'm having right now is an attempt to be transparent. We have to be transparent, and we have to talk in very realistic terms. We can't get all hot and bothered about coronavirus if we're not going to do the same about the flu, which is right here at our doorsteps. At the same time, we don't need to minimize minimize the experiences that many people, including ourselves, are having throughout the world. Coronavirus is affecting the world and our global economy and so many other things. So I hope this makes sense to you guys. I hope that you understand my stance. It's something that's been on my heart for a long time. I've been meaning to say this because I'm really not comfortable when we as doctors say, don't worry about coronavirus, worry about the flu. I'm not comfortable with that because to me, that minimizes the experiences of so many people. That minimizes what we're seeing on the news. It minimizes the potential impact. And the fact is, we're not at a pandemic stage yet, but we could be. However, we don't need to have widespread panic, and we don't need to have xenophobic behavior or racist behavior. And however, we need to be paying attention also to the things that we do have, which is the flu, which has affected lots of people. And like I said, 105 kids have died so far this season. So anyway, I want to know your thoughts. Tell me what you think. When I go on TV, I try to provide a balanced perspective. We don't want panic. We don't want widespread fear. It's not appropriate. I think concern is absolutely appropriate about coronavirus. But I want people to be concerned about the flu too, because it's actually one of the worst, or actually one of the more sort of widespread flu seasons that we've had in a while. So, all right, guys, I'm done. Rant over. Let me know what you guys think. I look forward to hearing from you.
So, Doctor, can you talk about some of the external costs of the shutdowns? Because there are calls to shut down America again. They might shut down other states, including Florida, very soon.
I think the smartest thing you can do is look at a nation that shut down, a nation that didn't shut down, how to go.
Well, so just so you know, the zeitgeist of America is that Sweden is an unbelievable disaster.
Which is not true.
Tell us why.
5,600 deaths and 10.2 million people. When you ask Anders Tegnell, chief epidemiologist, how are you doing? How are things going? He said, well, we're content with our results. Please extrapolate, they ask him. He says, well, our nursing homes weren't protected well. They're very large compared to our Nordic neighbor. They're very large. They had some hygiene issues. They had rampant 50 to 60% death rate came from those in the elderly centers. So if you decrease that, it's down to 2,500. And then Norway, which is right next door, is 5 million, half the size. They had much less death rate, but they also have less immunity. So 1 to 2% immunity versus about 20% immunity. So guess what happens during cold and flu when this starts up again? And you have a nation that has immunity and a nation that has no immunity. You don't have to be a scientist to know one nation is better prepared than the other. Also, they didn't have a free-falling economy. There's a public health, there's medical problems that arise when you shut down. People say it's just financial. Au contraire, I have to say to that. Let's talk about the 600% increase in suicide reportings. Let's talk about the spousal abuse. Let's talk about alcoholism. I have firsthand cases of suicide in my area. I have firsthand cases of people who are going into a bad depression. These are not just me. I've talked to ER physicians around the country that said public health crisis secondary to financial lockdown. This is not financial, this is medical. So you can't just say that it's a financial issue. And when I look at Norway and I say kids are in school, restaurants are open, economy is not in free fall, I think that is a sustainable model. When you ask Anders Tegnell, how are you guys doing? He goes, we're in a sustainable model. He goes, the U.S. pulled it back down to an unsustainable, impractical model that you can't do. We can do this for years. Can you?
And they want to shut down America again, which again, it seems a common theme here, if I were to kind of summarize, is that we've been deceived and we are continually being deceived. There seems to be a broader totalitarian agenda at play, and that there is a solution that actually no one wants to talk about, right?
I think one thing that the overall problem to this approach is we are it's a strategy problem where we're locking down everyone. We want masks on everyone, and we're kind of forgetting that the fatality rate in children that go to schools, in people under 45, people under 60, is extremely low. This is not a universal strategy for everyone. There's no reason to destroy the youth's lives, to destroy the economy, to destroy businesses when this affects a small percentage of the population. That should be the focus, we made that mistake back in March with nursing homes. We didn't focus on the most vulnerable people. And that's, I think, what we're still doing, is we're not focusing on the most vulnerable people. We're worried about the 22-year-old who's walking down the street without a mask on. That's who we're yelling at right now. Okay? And so this is a misdirection on appropriate resources and energy to focus on those older patients, those people that maybe should be on hydroxychloroquine, the ones that maybe should have guidance, the right guidance that's different from someone who is younger. And that's, and it's